I was telling my other son, who's not here, before coming here, that I hoped I could read the little scrawl that I put on the top of each poem. And it just, the journal entry by Keats reminded me of what I learned in grade 9 English, that there was some poet or other, I forget who, maybe you remember Don, who used to carry around a notebook but no pen. But he smoked, and he would just use matches, charred matches to jot down ideas, because that was just legible enough that it would trigger the memory, but not so legible that it was fixed. It was still flexible. So maybe my notes are like that. Anyway, as we all know, relationships are wonderful. But relationships can also be painful and confusing. In fact, the degree of pain and confusingness is directly proportional to the importance and the wonder of the relationship. But the wonder is what makes them worth repairing and pursuing. The first time I argued with you was like stumbling into my desk in broad daylight. The sharp corner came out of nowhere, thrust in my gut, knocking me windless. I had thought it was further to my right, had rounded that corner so often in mindless safety. I could not breathe, had to sit down quickly, gasping, and wrestle back tears. Several days later, underneath my shirt, I still had a mark where I struck. The first time I argued with you was like the day long ago playing Scrabble at a picnic with friends at a table under an oak, and a football swooped down swift from the blue, pounded on the board, and shattered our neatly meshed words. The letters flew everywhere, littering the grass. It was full 20 seconds of bewildered silence before we could rise and stoop, groping for the tiles among long green blades. This one is for a person whose friendship was lost, and then much later, years after this poem was written, was regained. One color missing. I'm almost used to this almost peace. Then memories sharp with points like stars emerge and clutter the sky. Like a tight coiled spring or a jack-in-the-box one jars by accident, ache is unsquashed and flies in my unwary eye. It's as if the world had one color missing. Were a poem composed without the letter E, or a wobbly table that nothing fits under the leg of. I have gamely tried every road, wish I could get to wherever you've gone. If you'd shout from there, I would leap to my feet, tuck my head, and sprint toward the sound. Going back to the opening poem about fall and its contradictions of beauty and decay, these two poems are about deaths, and they try to capture how there are always signposts of life, even in the context of death. There are kids running around, or there are people energetically serving the bereaved and the mourners, or sometimes even material things can just be that signpost of life. And it can be very small things sometimes. That life goes on, not only here, but hereafter. One time I was on the way to a funeral, and could not get there because I was trapped on the 401 when it was completely shut down by an accident for over an hour. Everybody got out of their cars and wandered around. This poem is about that. Reflections on the way to Uncle Chris's funeral, accident blocking the 401. A faint floral scent, the only relief, as we sit in our steamy metal cells imprisoned on the highway, surrounded by exhaust. All friends now, all equally helpless, stuck. Curious, resigned, or angry, depending on each errand's urgency. Mine is a funeral. I was making good time. Now I'm stopped in my tracks. My engine turned off, my radio silenced. The service goes on without me. But you, over there, pink-bloused and hugely pregnant, leaning on the guardrail, 1 minute anxiously staring up the road and the next not even caring. It's good for me to see you, to give thanks with you that you aren't in labor with nowhere to go. To see you so tranquil, present, potential, glowing with your belly full of life. 2 weeks later, following a death, a different death. Didn't think I was so taken up with his early passing, yet the whole world around me reminds me, daring me gently, rejoice. And not just with the obvious stuff, like the startling brilliance of that cloud's edge, for instance, with the sun behind it, or the sudden upward flight of that lone white bird, but also the edgy shards of empty nutshells in the bowl on my counter, like a still life. Even the words, still life. Even the yellow helium balloon escaping the curl of that toddler's hand and rising. Even the circle of the bagel I hold in mine. Even my colleague saying at only 3 in the afternoon, well, I'm going home now. I'm going to finish with 3 for my sons. They all had paper routes when they were in grade school, and that's what this one is about. They delivered the sun, and secretly my husband and I wondered if the sun was really worth delivering. That's what was available. Collecting for the sun on a drizzly evening. Dry and idle in the car, I watch my boy flirt with puddles dimpling in driveways. In denim damp from May rain, he bounds up stone porch steps, knocks on doors, hops straight up and down like a new-sprung lamb as he waits for someone to come. I watch and wait while he waits. From the corner of my eye, I see the sinuous, undulating white of a cat in the deep green grass of the customer's lawn. He flings himself back in his seat in the car, hair dark with wet and clinging to his temples, and mimics to a T the customer's clucks at how she had lapsed and let the bill pile up. He cradles in his hand her magnanimous tip, her repentance in a welter of quarters, hoots his pleasure, calls for Tim Hortons and home. This is about the same son, our youngest, who was always eager to climb stuff. I would always have to peel him off every climbable structure in a store, or those electronic things that beep embarrassingly if you attempt to leave with something that hasn't been scanned. I would have to peel him off those. And when he was just a toddler, he climbed onto a picnic table in our campsite where we had just filled a basin with boiling water for dishes, and my husband had just gone to the end of the campsite to fetch cold water from the tap. And my son managed to tip this basin over himself, incurring very serious burns and lifelong scars. If you've ever seen a child suffer, especially a very little one who doesn't know what's going on, you know how hard that time would have been. But the experience didn't erase his impulse to climb, which was just an expression of his zest for life. This son also still has, a penchant for casually asking searching and unexpected questions. With my 13-year-old in January. After the storm, there were mountains of snow left by the plow in the mall parking lot, You and I crunched home on foot in the soft, chill dark from A&P. You thrust your shopping bag at me, sprinted off, leapt up the crisp snow slope, always my Tenzing, and stood at the summit, twirling in moonlight, waved, laughed aloud, while I stood below on glistening pavement and glowed among your glad echoes, remembering how at 20 months your life hovered in hospital after another, smaller, more terrible climb. The pain then is part of the joy now, I once heard it said. Or was it the reverse? Anyway, you must have known. You slid, cavorted down your snow alp again, pink-cheeked and panting, and asked what being a mother felt like. I had to pause and steady my voice to answer. This one is for another son who has just become a teacher. It's about a teacher I fondly recall from my grade school days. I should mention that my son is much cooler than this teacher was. This guy was fabulous and creative, but such a nerd. He made us learn to whistle all the songs from the HMS Pinafore by Gilbert and Sullivan, which I can still do. And so on. So Luke, this is for you. In Mr. Powley's grade 8 class, a man of marked uncoolness, black and white striped crimpine pants, salmon shirt, thick glasses, fat black plastic frames, plump face, girl lips, slicked hair. You did not care if we caricatured you on our notebooks, mimicked your idiosyncrasies in the schoolyard, made adolescent cracks behind your back. You knew your part was to teach, to point to ideas just out of reach so our coiled child brains would stretch for them. You talked up the beauties of syntax, the elusive mystery of history in multiple voices, the perfection of equations, the artful power of choral recitations and singing and whistling the pinafore. On a Bunsen burner perched on the windowsill, you brewed us tea during English class, bade us drop our pens, turn sideways to pass around sugar and milk, and to pour from each other. And while we sipped, our hands crept back to our pens to fill crisp pages, corralling our wisps of creativity, inking them into phrases that flew like kites. So on that note about creative writing, other people can come and eat.